Hello, I'm Joe.
And TJ.
And we are the Schoolhouse 302. And this is our Read This series where we bring you great books on the topic of leadership so you can lead better and grow faster. And I am pumped about today's Read This, one of my favorite topics, the grind. And you know what? I'm pumped, TJ. This is, going through the grind. That's what we're focused on. And I'm totally pumped, man. I got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Wait a second, dude. I think we're going to have to cut to a different set here because I think you're using the wrong run sheet. I don't know. You got goggles and a band around your arm and you just said
that's my compression sleeve, dude. We're talking about the grind. We're going to talk a little bit about triathlons today, how to mix in some extreme CrossFit.
That's nothing to do with what we're talking about. I mean, maybe, we need to have self-care and keep ourselves fit.
I thought you said today was about going through the grind.
No, in fact, it's not anything about going through the grind. We specifically wrote that you can't just go through the grind. You have to grow through the grind. This is about the chaotic environment that everybody's in and the ways in which we can alleviate stress for ourselves and stay focused. You got it all wrong. Although I do think that exercise is important. I'm up every day at 5 o'clock myself. And that's a great book, but we're recommending books and that's not on the list today.
So I'm not talking about Rich Froning.
Nope.
Bummer. I like Rich. CrossFit God, really.
But how about looking at the other run sheet real quick and making sure that we're on track with the first book, which is something that you brought up with me after our interview with Richard Schell, that you really liked his book that you read before we even picked up the Conscious Code.
I will switch gears. No pun intended there. Although I probably would much rather talk about triathlons and cycling. But I will get into our first book. Thank you for setting me straight as always. Although I will say I do like doing this in a t-shirt while you're in a button up. But let me just say the first book I have, if we're going to talk about growing through the grind, and again, apologies. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Richard Schell. And this was a little bit of an audible for us to pull because this is something I learned about a little bit later. I've dug heavy into this book. I really like it. It's called The Art of Woo by Richard Schell and Mario Musa. And it's really about using strategic persuasion to sell ideas. Now, here's where I like this book. It's very real, very real. It lays out practical strategies. And I will say then they couple those strategies with just great thoughts. Like, for example, there's a whole story in here about that we're ego-sensitive creatures and how there's a great Michael Eisner, who's a former CEO of Walt Disney, brings on Michael Ovitz, and that relationship. It's critical because if we're going to get through difficult times, we need to learn how to get our ideas across that may not be so popular. And one thing about leadership during the pandemic, and really at all times, but definitely hyper-focused now, is that we have to make difficult decisions. I rely on books like The Art of Woo because they take a different approach. It's not just about, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, having the courage. No, you got to suck it up and have the courage to have the tough conversation. But in the end, were you able to really articulate what needs to be done and why? And that's why I like books like this, because as we grow through the grind, we're pulling ourselves through, and our teams, how effective are we at doing it? But very practical strategies and filled with stories. And I really like how it's laid out. I am a fan of Richard Schell since I read one of his books called Springboard. Not that we're going to talk about that today, but pick it up, The Art of Woo. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah, that's a great book. We got to talk to Richard Schell. If you haven't listened to our podcast with him, he's an author of a number of great books. We got to talk about the Conscious Code That was a lot of fun and a lot of great insight from him. In fact, two very specific strategies that he brings up on the podcast. So check that out. We'll link to it in the show notes. Joe, I wanted to introduce the audience to the Culture Engine by Chris Edmonds. If you haven't already heard of it, it's a framework for driving results, inspiring your employees, and transforming the workplace. What I really liked about this book, and while we're on this practical kick, and what people really need these days is something practical, not something theoretical. You and I love the theory, but people are, as they go through the grind, they need to grow through the grind. And so what they need is things that they can implement. This is almost like a step-by-step guide around your purpose statements, your core values, even outlining the very specific behaviors that you would want to see underneath the core values. There's open space within the text. Although this is a hardback copy of the book, you wouldn't realize it's almost like a workbook. And so any leader could pick this up and work through it, reestablishing your values maybe. If you don't have those on paper, it's something we talked about in our 5 strategies, putting your vision to the test, making sure your core values are clear. And I couldn't think of a better book to introduce to our audience than the Culture Engine. And by the way, the foreword is by Ken Blanchard. And you know, we love that, gung ho. We always got to sneak in a couple of other titles, don't we? Can't help ourselves. Joe, do you have a tip for our audience?
I do. And TJ, you know, I love 3x5 cards. I'm a big fan of them. I have them on this tip this time. These are the Little Mead. You can pick up Mead. Staples has them. You know, there's a bunch of different kinds, but that's a little 4x6 booklet. And we read a lot. This whole podcast series is on reading, but this also is an age of info whelm. So one thing I started doing recently, and I really confess this to TJ, is, you know, as I was reading and using Audible and some other reasons, I could really get to the end of the day and not necessarily be sure of what I read. I wasn't necessarily learning. And I started just using this little trick. So like you'll see, if I open this up, you'll see it just says book notes at the top. And this is a reference book, really like highlights key ideas. So rather than just annotating the book and writing in the book, which I do like, I believe in that. We teach that in our schools. I use a little 4x6 Mead pad to really write down little things, write down page numbers like, hey, Joe, and I'll write that to myself. Hey, Joe, remember page 23, big idea there when trying to get across a big idea in an organization. And it talks about how we really need to get a lot of people involved, close to like 20, if we really want to sell an idea. And that's why I like this type of book. Like I said, very practical, well-researched. And it's not something, the knowledge you're gaining that you're going to carry around with you on any given day. So pick this little tip up. It's nice. It's easy. These are cheap. And it's, again, a lot easier than just carrying around the whole book with you. Just have this in your back pocket and you can refer to it throughout the day like you're learning. You're actually learning what you're reading so you can implement it to be a better leader. That's the goal, to be a better leader, to lead better, grow faster.
Yeah, no, great tip. Thanks for that. It's almost like a catalog of what you're reading. It's also a summarization tool and your ability to do retrieval practice all in one. And that's great for your brain. We learned that from the neuroscience. There you have it. Another Read This series, 2 great books. I think we actually mentioned 4 in total. We hope you'll visit the site at theschoolhouse302.com. Check out the podcast with Richard Shell. Joe looks like he's getting ready to do his workout anyway, which is a good thing. We'll see you next time. As always, we appreciate a like, a follow, and a share.